4 candidates debate the issues. All seek the Republican nomination for North Carolina's U.S. Senate seat. Next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Good evening, North Carolina. I'm Kelly McCullen. The Republican Party in this state is nominating its candidate for U.S. Senate. Joining us tonight are the 4 Republican candidates who have met UNC-TV's viewpoint-neutral criteria for debate participation. They are Greg Brannon, Heather Grant, Mark Harris, and Thom Tillis. The candidates will be asked questions on a rotating alphabetical order, receiving 1 minute to answer. It's my job to keep the candidates on time as best possible. Every candidate can use an optional 30-second rebuttal for every question I ask this evening. We drew names earlier to determine the order of the 45-second opening statements. Mr. Brannon, the first 45 seconds are all yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm an OBGYN, and I'm running this race because it reminds me of a high-risk delivery. Sometimes in those high-risk deliveries where things are looking bleak and dark, you fall back to your true foundational principles. The chaos is around you, but you go back to those constitutional beliefs. You go back, you follow through, and before you know it, you have that beautiful breath of life. I believe right now the constitutional crisis we're in is because federal government has usurped their power. It's time for true statesmen, not bureaucrats. It's time to understand that the rule of law is based to protect the individual, the collective, and that's when society is at its best.
Mr. Harris, 45 seconds.
Yes, I'm in this race and very grateful to be here tonight, but recognizing that we are in a crisis of leadership in our country. Leadership that I frankly believe is needing to be replaced. Leadership that will taking to replace Kay Hagan with really the experience in leadership of bringing people together, working together as a servant leader. I also believe there are essentials in leadership that we need to talk about tonight, such as character, consistency, and courage. And then at the end of the day, there's the electability in leadership, and that is electing, and as a GOP standard bearer, the one who will be able to take the message to Kay Hagan directly and to the people of North Carolina, and let's have a brand new United States Senator this year.
Mr. Tillis.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm running for the U.S. Senate because Kay Hagan has failed the people of North Carolina. I come from the business world outside of the political establishment, and I've overcome obstacles all of my life. I grew up in a working family of limited means that strived to achieve the American dream. I took those values to Raleigh, and I led a conservative revolution that cut taxes, cut spending, cut regulations, and put our economy back on track. I want to take that same mindset to Washington and start cleaning up Kay Hagan's mess. We need a North Carolina senator that respects your values and represents the interest of the people of North Carolina. I'm that senator, and I'm asking for your vote.
Ms. Grant, 45 seconds.
Good evening. I'm Heather Grant, and I'm one of the U.S. Senate candidates, and I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Northwest North Carolina, and I'm a wife, a mother, a disabled Army veteran, a nurse practitioner, and a constitutional conservative. When I got into this race, I did it because I knew we needed solutions to help take back our country and provide a better future for us and our children and our children's children. And my campaign is based on my belief in God, the rightness of our Constitution, the very foundation of this nation, and reforms that will positively impact your household, not Washington, D.C. Because no matter at the end of the day, the most important thing is, can you put a roof over your head and food on your table, and D.C.'s forgotten that. I ask for your vote in May.
First question, the candidates will answer every question, the same question, but we begin with you, Mr. Brannon. I saw the first 2 debates, read the feedback in the papers, and one of the words that popped out to me was harmony among the candidates, with a sense when you discuss the issues, it's now or never. So what makes you different from your other 3 opponents up here on this stage tonight, speaking to North Carolina?
I think the clear distinction is knowing the Constitution. I prepared as an OBGYN for 15 years after high school before I had the scalpel in my hand for the first time. I put the same effort in this Constitution. If you do not know the roadmap, if you do not know the plan, the contract, how can you be a complete oath keeper on that? It's very important that we know those 6 pages, that they chain the federal government, not the individual. The Bill of Rights is separate. Over here, it's God-given natural rights in which the federal government can never infringe upon. So I believe that I'm most prepared for this. I understand that Constitution inside and out. I've been an oath keeper, I'm a Hippocratic Oath for over 26 years, delivering over 9,000 babies. This is a constitutional crisis we talked about because the federal government usurped their powers. In Article 1, Section 8, there's 18 functions for the federal government. The state is sovereign to protect the individual. I believe I'm clear on that, distinguishable on that, and will never waver on my oath.
Ms. Grant, what makes you different?
For me, this race is not about me being the next senator. What it's about is the future of our nation. And when we look at that future, it's bleak because we don't have people who are sitting in Washington who believe in building on the foundation that our founders gave us. They gave us the Constitution, and we've elected leaders who have gone there for the most part and sat and done nothing. And what we need now is a leader who understands what leadership is. And that is more than just doing the job that comes across your desk. You have to mentor, you have to grow our conservative base, and you have to be willing to help those who come behind you, because let's be realistic. We don't need any more lifetime politicians sitting in the same job for 30 years. What we need are people who understand that sometimes a fresh pair of eyes at the end of 6 or 12 years, there's nothing wrong with that. And you need to learn to be a resource and a mentor and a leader. And that's what makes me different.
Mr. Harris, what sets you apart?
Well, in many ways, Kelly, I would say it's kind of like where I started earlier tonight, talking about experience, working with people as a servant leader and bringing them together to accomplish things that, even though they have different perspectives, they can accomplish it a greater purpose. But I also think the essentials of character, consistency, and courage I talked about are critical in this issue, and that ties right back into the electability. Last time I checked, the purpose of a primary is to choose the candidate that is going to be able to defeat Kay Hagan this fall. And for me, I believe it is so critical that we have someone that is electable. There are 2 individuals on this platform tonight who carry with them baggage that I believe Kay Hagan will use to rip them apart. We have one candidate who did not support Mitt Romney over Barack Obama, and at the same time, in the last 2 months, had a lawsuit for misleading investors. Those are concerns that I have about what they will face. And then we have others we can talk about later.
Mr. Tillis, what sets you apart?
I think experience. You know, I led the conservative revolution in Raleigh, and we delivered on all the promises we made in 2010. I've been cleaning up Kay Hagan's mess. I know what it's like to come behind Kay Hagan and see the failed policies and to get it right. You know, being conservative is not something you say, it's something you do. And I've done it consistently in Raleigh. I'll do it consistently in Washington. We have a disaster waiting to happen. It's already began with the passage of Obamacare. Kay Hagan passed that and made the deciding vote. We've got to turn that around and repeal it. We've got to have leaders that understand the pressure cooker of the legislature, that understand how to get things done and deliver on the promises that they've made. I believe that I'm best positioned to do that because I've done it. I've done it for 3 years as the Speaker of the House. I've brought the caucus together, and I led this state back to a path of prosperity, and I'll do the same thing in Washington.
Second question, beginning with you, Ms. Grant. North Carolina's unemployment rate last month somewhere around 6.3%, but let's count all the people who are underemployed or have given up looking for work. Rate's about 13% or so if you count all of them. I'll ask you, all of you in fact, how do you get those people back to work at a level that makes them feel like they're whole with their skill set?
When you're looking at putting people back to work, what you have to look at is, do we have businesses? Do we have an environment that encourages business and business growth? Because we have a culture right now where when people are out of work, they're not going to start up their own business, and that used to be what happened. What we need to do is take the government out of that. We need to take away regulations like Dodd-Frank that keeps the banks from being able to loan money when businesses need it. We need to get rid of the Affordable Care Act because there are more and more people who are now part-time and less than 30 hours a week so businesses can keep their doors open. We need to look at encouraging tax reform, because let's face it, we all know that a business has to make a profit, and they're not going to lose that at the expense of employees, and they need to be able to have the money to produce more goods so that they can hire more people.
Mr. Harris, what do you say to the unemployed and the underemployed?
Well, Kelly, in the midst of this race, I've had the privilege of sitting down with business owners across North Carolina. And you know, it doesn't matter whether I'm talking to Dennis Carpenter, who has a Ford parts restoration company where they make the Ford parts in Concord, or whether I'm talking to Steve Shelton, who owns Fence Builders in Winston-Salem, whether I'm talking to Bob Moss, who owns Moss Supply, where they make replacement windows. And I say to them, what could I do in the United States Senate that would make the greatest difference for you to be able to create jobs and flourish in your small business? Without exception, two things keep coming back. One, we've got to lower the tax rate on our small businesses. And number two, we have to remove the strangulation that we are putting around their necks with the regulations. In fact, Bob Moss remembers when his dad started that company. He remembers when OSHA first came in and they had about 3/4 of a page of regulations. Today, it's almost 86 pages, that same document. We won't create jobs until we begin to move in that direction.
Mr. Tillis, how do you put them all back to work?
Well, I tell you what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't follow Kay Hagan's failures of Obamacare, which put 2.5 million people out of work. Regulations that are putting hundreds of thousands of people out of work. Kay Hagan doesn't get that government doesn't create jobs. Government kills jobs. What I would do is much the same what we've done in North Carolina over the last 3 years. You know, when I came in as Speaker, the unemployment rate was 10.4%. It's now 6.3 and below the national average. The things that we're doing in North Carolina are very different from what's going on in the nation. We've cut taxes, we've cut spending, we've balanced the budgets, and we've cut regulations. We've listened to businesses, and we've done everything that we can to get big government out of the way so that businesses can invest and feel confident that they can make investments and not have another shoe drop, as Kay Hagan has done numerous times, just eliminating the chances for businesses to grow and prosper. We'll end that. We'll get back to the same sort of principles that we've done here in North Carolina, and it'll work for the nation.
Mr. Brannon.
Yeah, government does not cause jobs, right? Entrepreneurs do. I'm a real detail guy, so I read Dodd-Frank and I wrote Obamacare. They destroy the economy. True markets will build up America. We have a Fed now printing money like water. Since 1914, our dollar's decreased in value 96%. Since 71, it's decreased 85%. The idea of these word regulate meant to make regular, not to hinder. There are 176,122 federal regulations. Obamacare is going to destroy the economy. State exchange is $684 billion over the next 10 years. What we need to do is understand that when those things are gone, the individual can choose how they're going to do that. That's the job creator, not the federal government.
Question 3, Mr. Harris, you'll answer this one first. Don't waste your valuable answer telling me you will repeal Obamacare. You get a vote if you do. You would vote to do it. We know that. All of you are on board with the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. But how should the health insurance industry look if it's conservatively principled?
Well, I think if you really go back to the ideas that conservatives had early on, but failed to really communicate their message and really have the courage and backbone to see it made law, there have been principles in place that we support, such as expanding health savings accounts here in our nation. Really allowing folks to purchase their health care across state lines. That's a critical thing. That's a competitive aspect. And also just putting an end to the frivolous lawsuits that continue to drive up the cost of health care in this nation each and every year. The bottom line is all of those solutions are free market solutions. And at the end of the day, I think that's what separates us from what Kay Hagan has done. Kay Hagan called early on to say that in the process that she wanted to call for a probe of Obamacare after it was such a disaster in October. Our campaign was the one who immediately wrote to Washington, D.C. and said, we won't see a probe of Obamacare until there's a probe of Kay Hagan. And we asked several questions, including the role that she had in writing it.
Mr. Tillis, as Senator, you might get a shot at this. What do you do with health care?
Kelly, I hope the first vote that I cast in 2015 is the repeal of Obamacare. The citizens of North Carolina need to understand the failure that this represents and that Kay Hagan passed into law. $3 trillion over the next 10 years. add it to a debt that we can't afford today. $700 billion stolen from Medicare to try and balance the books, and it still doesn't work. 2.5 million jobs lost because of Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster that's destroying our economy and putting us deeper in debt. We need to look at healthcare solutions that are patient-centered, that depend primarily on the free market, that address things like high-risk pools, that address the ability to buy health insurance over state lines and increase competition, not stifle innovation and all the things that Kay Hagan did when she voted for Obamacare.
Mr. Brannon, how do you form policy?
Well, I think it's a clear distinction between myself and Thom. He actually said Obamacare has some good ideas, we just can't afford it. He actually had a plan for a state exchange, but the state Senate stopped that. I actually went back and read Obamacare. It took me 5 months to read it. It destroys the individual relationship with the doctor. The first thing you do is defund it. Senator Cruz is 100% correct. Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1 puts the power of the purse string in the House. They defund it. Then you repeal it. But this is where you go back at the Constitution. Where in Article 1, Section 8 is health care? This is a free market decision. That's where you go back to the Constitution again. The Commerce Clause. I wrote a paper in 2010 on this. In 2010, there were 267 health insurance companies in the United States. What if all of them were in North Carolina competing for our dollar? What if in North Carolina we did not have a certificate need, we could open up a hospital and compete? What happens if competition every time? Prices go down, quality goes up.
Ms. Grant, conservative principled health care, how would it look?
Free market. Looking at health care savings plans that actually roll over if you don't actually use all of them, just like your FSA should roll over from year to year to year. But the biggest problem we have right now with the charges and the costs that are coming to our insurance companies and to our patients are the fact that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services set your reimbursement. That is a main government entity. We need to take that entity out of what the doctor's offices should be charging so that you can have a true reasonable rate that's being charged to your patient. That opens up more health insurance companies who will want to come in and be able to get reimbursement, offer good policies and at decent rates, and won't be so worried about things like pre-existing conditions. And if we have problems with that, your states, who this is supposed to fall under, can create regulations just like we do for the auto insurance that ensure pre-existing conditions are covered.
Mr. Tillis, 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, you know, Greg Brannon says kind of spreading the same fiction that Harry Reid and Kay Hagan have tried to do, spending almost $6 million in attack ads against me since December. The fact of the matter is, I've been fighting Obamacare since the second day I was on the job when we passed a bill to try and enter the lawsuit to try and overturn Obamacare in the courts. We've passed legislation to prohibit state exchanges. We passed legislation to prohibit the expansion of Medicaid. My record is very clear on opposing Obamacare, and I will work to repeal this bad policy when I get to Washington.
Mr. Brannon, rebuttal.
What he just talked about, the law case. This is important in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has no power to enforce their opinion. This goes back to state sovereignty. So I think, again, it's the Constitution we have to go back to apply any usurp the power of the Congress over onto our state. The court only has 6 functions, and none of us enforce their opinion. The state must say no to the federal government, to the Supreme Court overacting their opinion.
Mr. Tillis, next question begins with you. I read that Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky said that the GOP must agree to disagree on some social issues in order to broaden the Republican tent. Paraphrased, if possible, what social issues could you see Republicans agreeing to call a truce on in favor of more higher priority issues?
I think Mr. Paul makes a point on a broader basis of, you know, the conservatives are great in their independence. That's what makes us the great party that the Republican Party represents. We can go into the caucus and have a difference of opinions, but we need to focus on what's really going on in this election, what's important in this election. We need to unify around the reality that President Obama and Kay Hagan are destroying this nation. We need to set the priorities that the Americans expect us to do when we come into power. It's repealing Obamacare. It's cutting regulations. It's reducing taxes. It's coming up with a policy that makes sense and an agenda that gets the economy back on track. If we do that and work on those things, a lot of the other issues confronting Americans will work themselves out. We have to start with the basics. We have to build on that, and then we can move on to other matters. But first and foremost, we've got to come together and heal this economy and create jobs.
Mr. Brannon, agree to disagree, that line, what does it mean to you?
Senator Paul's endorsed my campaign, number one. Number two, a Republican Party is a great party because of the love of sanctity of life. Any government does not protect sanctity of life cannot protect liberty. So we must never run away from that. We must run towards that. Then the building coalition that wins hearts and minds is liberty and freedom. That's why it's so important to understand the legitimate role of a government. The legitimate role of government is not to attack anybody's inalienable rights. It's to actually break those regulations. So I believe Senator Paul is talking about when you go back to those principles, that's the winning coalition. That's what Reagan stood on. Reagan never wavered, and what happened was he built a coalition that won 43 states. And then his next time he won 49 states. So I believe as a Republicans, we must run to those principles, which are basically stand on the shoulders of our great founders and men like Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King. That's the winning coalition.
Ms. Grant, agree to disagree on social issues if you're a Republican. What do you make of it?
Well, this is something I've talked about before in just about every place I've been. I am a firm believer in Reagan's 80% friend versus 20% enemy. Now, we have a platform in the Republican Party that we stand on and we believe in, and we should not waver from that. But just because you and I don't agree does not mean that I should hate you or not work with you where we do agree. My husband and I have been married for a really long time and been together for, I guess, about half my life now. And I can't think of any one time we have agreed 100% on everything. I haven't divorced him because of it, so why should we expect people that we send to Washington to agree with us 100% of the time? Agree to disagree, fight over that disagreement, but where we agree, I'm going to grab a hold of you, you're going to run to my side, and we are going to work together to fix what we have to fix. But there's nothing wrong with agreeing to disagree as long as we continue to stand on our party's platform.
Mr. Harris, agree to disagree on all the social issues. What?
Kelly, I think it's very interesting that you referenced Rand Paul when you brought that up, because I really think the citizens of North Carolina have an opportunity to make a choice here. I think if we were to choose Speaker Tillis, that you would find someone that is more in the Lindsey Graham, John McCain mode. I think if you were to choose Greg Brannon, you would choose someone, as he said, that had been endorsed by Rand Paul. And what I believe we need in North Carolina is a United States Senator that comes from the Reagan perspective. Reagan taught all of us that to build a strong America is like building a three-legged stool with a strong domestic agenda, a strong foreign policy, and strong traditional values. And Reagan taught us, and I think we've seen that, and that's why many have said that this primary for U.S. Senate is for the heart and soul of the North Carolina GOP, and it's for the heart and soul of the national GOP even, and that is Reagan said that if you try to weaken or break off any one of those three legs, that stool will not stand. I've been taking this message across the state that that three-legged stool must stand in our day.
Mr. Tillis, 30-second rebuttal.
You know, being conservative is something you do, not just say. And being a conservative in North Carolina and leading the conservative revolution, I've been responsible for promoting life, which is important and will be important when I become U.S. Senator. That's why I have the endorsement of the national right to life. I've been consistent in my policy on Second Amendments. That's why I've got the endorsement of the NRA. You can get this done and have a balanced agenda. I've proven I can do it, and I'll do it in Washington.
Mr. Brannon, 30 seconds.
Yeah, conservative is very important. Conserve life. I'm on the front rows of the battle for life for 26 years. Second Amendment, National Association of Gun Rights. But when Senator Lee endorsed me, he said, we got to stop talking about Ronald Reagan and act like Ronald Reagan. And he endorsed me.
Mr. Harris.
Yeah, I've heard it said up here that being conservative is about what you do rather than what you say. But the reality is that both, it's not only your talk and your walk, but together they make the difference. We've seen even here in our own state with the marriage amendment that the Speaker's been telling everybody that he was responsible for getting it on the ballot, when the reality is just days before the primary, he told college students, if you don't like it, you can repeal it in 20 years. So, you know, again, cutting us off at the knees. And so we must have those that will defend it at every step.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Brannon, let's talk about the Constitution.
Okay. I like that topic.
When you study it, in reference to modern day policy, where do you find strict policy answers in that document, and where do you find room for interpretation as you would make a policy decision?
Yeah, it's really important this is a contract between sovereign states and the federal government. The federal government is an agent to the sovereign states to do 18 functions, defense and free trade. It was written in English. In fact, the preamble to the Bill of Rights is beautiful. It says we want these declaratory statements done so you don't misinterpret our ideas. Either the Constitution, which actually one of us are going to give our oath to, in fact, Heather already gave her oath to, is in the service. In Article 6, Clause 3, is actually our oath to the Constitution, uphold the Constitution. Therefore, it is written in English to go back to. So every single policy issue we're talking about today is because, again, the government usurped their power and left Article 1, Section 8. So I think it's very simple. Where's health care at the federal level? Where's attacking the Second Amendment at the federal level? They're not there. It goes through that prism, and there's your answer on the issues. It's important that we understand if we do not have that framework, then we are not a rule of law. We become the rule of men, where that dehumanizes the individual.
Ms. Grant, what do you feel about the strict interpretation finding modern-day answers in the U.S. Constitution versus using it as a guidepost to influence you as you make a decision?
It's simple. When our founders wrote the Constitution, they wrote it in the everyday English of the time. So if you could read it and understand it, and you knew what was expected of you and your government. And if you couldn't read, someone could read it to you and you could understand it. So there's no interpretation. It is what it says it is, and that's why our Supreme Court does not have the right to interpret it. They are supposed to make their judgments based on the law as it is written.
Mr. Harris.
Well, I believe that the Constitution is indeed that sacred trust that has been passed down from generation to generation. I believe when you look at that Constitution, it's very clear that it describes for us the role of government is to simply secure and protect the rights that have already been given to all of us, not by a government, but by God Himself. And so I think that's critical to understand. But I also agree that as you walk through and look at the Constitution, it prescribes the framework for how we do business and how we will operate as a people. That is so critical in our day in which we're living, because we have a president in Barack Obama that would choose to operate outside that Constitution at times. You have activist judges on the federal bench that are choosing to legislate from their bench, which is a disaster. And I think we've got to have folks that understand, appreciate, and will stand on this sacred trust that has been passed down.
Mr. Tillis, strict interpretation, applying it to modern day policy. What's your balance?
Well, first, I agree with what's been said here among my opponents, but I think we also need to get back to, well, first, I've sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the North Carolina Constitution on 4 different occasions in the North Carolina House of Representatives. I'm disgusted by the lack of respect for the Constitution that's demonstrated by Kay Hagan and by Barack Obama. Their overreach over states' rights are numerous examples in this state, and I've been having to clean up the mess as a result of Kay Hagan's disrespect for the Constitution. We need to get back. I'm not one of these people that think constitutionality is like on a scale of 1 to 10. It's either constitutional or it's not. But we have seen judges interpreting the Constitution in ways, I think, that are far afield from what the Founding Fathers had in mind. We've seen numerous examples where this president seems to ignore the Constitution and also ignore the rule of law to this nation's detriment. He's choosing and picking the laws he wants to enforce. He's choosing and picking the sections of the Constitution that he respects. That's wrong. We've got to stop it.
Mr. Brannon, 30 seconds.
Again, this is a clear distinction because we're running for a job that you must understand this backwards and forwards. Where's Common Core? Where is health care? Where are these things? And this is why we need the state legislators to stand up and the ambassador on the federal level, our U.S. senators, to say no to this power takeover and grab. The running to the Supreme Court is not the answer. Running back to the actual contract itself is called the original intent or the intent of the maker. That's our country.
Ms. Grant, let's switch to foreign policy. Lots going on over in Europe and Asia. How should the U.S. government respond if Russian military forces enter Ukraine?
When we look at our military being deployed and look at what we should be doing, we first have to look at what are our true interests there and what are we protecting. American citizens, American interests, American soldiers. And for me, it's a matter of we should have already done something about what's going on. We should have put in place the opportunity to open the Keystone Pipeline. We should be working with the European Union to take our natural gas that we're burning off. We should be opening up ANWR to potential drilling applications. But then we should have taken our military ships and just placed them very ever so politely just in the international water there to make a statement, because that's the best thing we could have done to tell Russia and to tell Putin that we did not need his approval for what we do. We're going to make our economy strong, and in the process, you actually weaken him.
Mr. Harris, what do you do about Russia if it enters Ukraine?
Well, Kelly, I think what we're witnessing today is what I feared we've been seeing over these weeks and months of this campaign, as we've talked about that Barack Obama has almost single-handedly destroyed America's reputation and standing on the world stage. And I say almost single-handedly because he couldn't have done it without the help of Kay Hagan and the Democrats in the United States Senate. I am convinced that when you look at what is happening in the Ukraine, as Russia has now moved into Crimea, has now stacked up troops on its borders, we have some very clear opportunities for response. Number one, I think we need to be making the folks in the Ukraine understand that we are going to be there with them. We're the ones back during the Clinton era that told them to get rid of their weapons. They didn't need them. We would take care of them. America's word must mean something in the world stage. So that's the first step, in making sure that they have options of being able to use the military intelligence. Second, I would be going to Poland and reinitiating those strategic defense initiatives as well.
Mr. Tillis.
Well, we need to revisit how we got here. We got here because people like Kay Hagan rubber-stamped a failed foreign policy on the part of President Obama. We're weaker than we were when he came into office, when Kay Hagan came into office. We're viewed as weak in the Middle East. We're viewed weak in Russia. Russia is going back to its playbook from the Cold War. And we need to go back and take a few lessons from that same playbook. Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a single shot. He understood that the best approach and the safest approach to getting Russia to stop its expansionist tendencies is to put them on notice that we're the richest nation in the world. We have oil and energy reserves unlike any other. We should step up exploration. We should open the Keystone Pipeline. We should put more oil through the Alaska Pipeline and prove to Russia that we can do again what we've done once before. Russia's behavior is unacceptable. We have the means to deal with it versus weakening our economy and weakening our military, which is what Kay Hagan has supported through Obama's policies.
Mr. Brannon.
Yeah, it's years of this president and Ms. Hagan going down this path. They're trying to put us in a position where we're going to act out of weakness. America's military is crucial. It's power under control for American liberty interest. Energy is the key to this whole thing. If we were at our last gas refinery is 1973. The Pudong Sound, the west part, was the largest oil reserve ever found. Let's drill it on ANWR. Let's have an Article 4 section of the Constitution. The federal government makes money by selling its territories and lands. Sell back the part of the western states again, then the states can sell them to entrepreneurs to look for gas, look for oil, to build this energy reserve again. We must go back. Jefferson and Washington warned about permanent allegiances. Washington said in his farewell address that if we do those things, we may actually spill our blood and treasure for things that are not for American interest and liberty. Got to go back to those core principles.
Mr. Harris, 30 seconds.
I agree that we need to be very careful in any kind of action that we would take militarily, but I also understand that where America's national security interests are at stake, that must be on the table. And when you have Vladimir Putin, who said himself that the worst tragedy of the 20th century was the demise of the Soviet Union, we must be willing to have on the table the ability to look at that and realize that the rebuilding of the former Soviet Union is in the national interest of the United States to stop it.
Mr. Tillis, half minute.
Look, we've got to keep in mind that Kay Hagan supporting Barack Obama and reducing our ability to fight on more than one front is dangerous. We need to keep in mind that we can win the battle with Russia without firing a single shot through strong economic policy, energy policy first among them. We need to be certain that the American people know what's at stake. We can solve this problem. Kay Hagan created it. I can fix it.
Mr. Brannon.
Yeah, again, it's the key of the many years of these bad policies under this president. But one of the best books on foreign policy, Senator Taft's book in 1951, he stressed that it's a defense, our military is a defense for individual liberty. We cannot overstep those bounds, but the only way to do that is if you're the strongest man in the block, you're not going to be fought for. It's crucial, energy-wise and military-wise. I love the phrase power under control.
Mr. Harris, let's spin the globe just a bit and look at Iran. Conservatives, I've heard them on national news say they believe Iran will get a bomb, nuclear weapon, sooner or later, in spite of the international sanctions. If you're a U.S. Senator representing North Carolina and all that military and Iran gets the bomb, what do you come back home and tell our military families to expect?
Well, I think without question that we must recognize the seriousness of that threat. We all know that one of the things that has happened is we've seen America's standing and reputation on the world stage suffer under this president, that our allies are not even certain that we have their backs. In fact, I'm convinced that Benjamin Netanyahu has spent far too many sleepless nights uncertain that should Israel be attacked, whether or not this president and this administration would actually have his back. So I believe it is critical that we let our allies know that we are going to stand strong with them. And I believe, in specific answer to your questions, our military families would need to know that they needed to be on alert, that action would need to be perhaps taken. My hope is that we're going to be able to stop the development of that bomb, even beyond economic sanctions if it becomes necessary, because it's that critical to stability in the Middle East.
Mr. Tillis.
Kelly, it's just another example where Kay Hagan sat idly by as the president has weakened our position in the Middle East. Iran having a nuclear weapon is unacceptable, and we have to do everything within our power to prevent that from happening. I don't accept the hypothetical that, hey, someday they may have it. We have to do everything to prevent that from happening. The Iranian leadership have said that they get a nuclear bomb, they'll launch one on Israel. They can't even recognize Israel's right to exist. We have to stand up for Israel. We have to stand up for the world, because a nuclear Iran makes this a very dangerous place. And this president's already made it more dangerous by reducing sanctions. He should be increasing sanctions. Kay Hagan should be asking the president, demanding that the president, in the home of the third highest military concentration in this nation, more families here than any but 2 other states, we should be protecting those people by making sure Iran never has a nuclear weapon, and I'll fight every single day for that purpose.
Mr. Brannon.
It's safer for America if Iran does not have it. Israel, being our ally in that area, the only democracy there we support, it's crucial that they have their defenses prepared. It goes back again for these years and years, and Ms. Hagan doing nothing by, in the sense of Obama's policies have just weakened us so much that we're going to have to make a decision at a haste. That can't occur. We have to make sure we go back to where we're supposed to be in strength. But the power that we have with Iran there, we have the military, we have the economics, we just have to flex that muscle, protect that wise. But Israel's crucial at that point. A safe Israel's a safe America.
Ms. Grant, the bomb possibilities with Iran, Israel, and U.S. policy, what would you do as senator? What would you tell us?
I would tell you that it's a very real possibility. I would tell you that I have lost brothers and sisters in the military in Iraq, Afghanistan. The Middle East is not stable, and we must do everything we can to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. We must stand with Israel, because there is no doubt that those people dislike America immensely. And we cannot for an instant think that they will not do anything and everything they can to attack us and to attack those who are allied with us. For me, I would tell my military families exactly what I told them when we were in. Be prepared that we may have to go to war with Iran, but we will do everything, sanctions, military, whatever it takes, so that they do not have a nuclear bomb, because we will not be safe once they have it. Make no mistake that it may not be just Israel that they attack, and we as a nation are not prepared for it.
Mr. Tillis, half minute.
Yeah, and Kelly, as late as today, Secretary of State Kerry made a comment that shows that they're trying to appease the people that actually want to destroy Israel and destroy free people all over this nation. We need to make it very clear to anyone in the Middle East that the table stakes for even come to the table for the United States is to recognize Israel's right to exist and to renounce terrorism. We're talking about a nation that not only doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, but they sponsor terrorism. That has to stop.
Staying with you, Mr. Tillis, I looked it up. Congress last declared war after Pearl Harbor. It's authorized military force several times by funding United Nations military actions. The presidents of different parties have bypassed Congress several times for unilateral military action. If we can get out of Afghanistan and bring the troops home, looking forward, what will guide you on future questions of getting our country into a military entanglement, if you will?
America needs to continue to be that nation that the world looks to defend freedom-loving people across the globe. If not for a strong America, this becomes a much more dangerous world. We need to recognize as the lone superpower that comes with it the responsibility to be able to protect our borders and our allies' borders. That requires a firm resolve, a strong military, not a military that's being cut back by Kay Hagan and Barack Obama, a strong military, a military that can fight more than one location on the globe, because this is a dangerous place. We have to have the ability to deploy at a moment's notice and to fight terror before it comes onto our borders. America is the only hope for the free world. We have to keep America strong, and we need to make it very clear to our allies that we'll be there, and we have to work very hard to keep a strong military and take care of our military families when those soldiers are deployed.
Mr. Brannon.
It's very important. It goes back to the Constitution again. Our founders spent about 6 weeks discussing how we go from a state of peace to a state of war. And the one thing they said, it will never be in the hands of the executive ever. We've only declared war 5 times in American history, 5 times. We have not done, as you said, is actually Romania actually declared war on us the last time we declared back on them when they went with the Axis powers. So the people have to declare war. They spend time discussing, we're going to have a defensive war in the Christian model of the Augustine model. You could defend that. Jefferson said, as executive, you can never go from a state of peace to a state of war, only in defense. So the idea is what we have to be. Again, it's power under control. It's for American purposes only. A strong America is good for the world, but in a way that is defensive. A defensive does not mean less powerful. It means prepared for that. But again, they were very concerned about having an executive power. It must be we the people declaring war, and then you win with everything you got. Everything you got.
Ms. Grant.
For me, when you look at voting to declare war, you have to first look at what our military strength is, where they're deployed, and are we able to in turn safely take troops and go to where we're looking at declaring war. When you look at that area, say if it's Iran, then we have to look at, is it to protect our people? Is it to protect our military? Is it to protect our ambassadors who may be there? Is it to protect our allies? And if you can answer yes to those questions, then we absolutely must declare war, because when we stop protecting and stop looking after our own, this is what we end up with, because we have absolutely stopped protecting and stopped looking after our own here in America.
Mr. Harris, declarations of war versus military authorizations.
Well, Kelly, I think at the end of the day, it really does come back to what we started with today, and that is that we are in a crisis of leadership. When you have a president who does not have a true foreign policy, then it definitely leaves the whole nation in this fragmented idea of where we're going and how we're going to operate. It's clear that Congress is the one that ultimately declares war. But when you have a president who has a true foreign policy, most of us remember and are old enough to remember something called peace through strength. That was a foreign policy that we were able to be that shining city on the hill. Our generation, unfortunately, over the last 6 years, have become used to the phrase leading from behind. And no one seems to know what that means, yet it's what we've been given by our White House. I believe it's critical for us to take military measures when our security interests are there. Our national security is threatened, but I believe ultimately we must have leadership to guide us.
Mr. Brannon, rebuttal.
It goes back to the beginning again. In the foreign policy, from the Articles of Confederation, all foreign policy decisions were made by the Senate, representing the sovereign states. Madison added executive just to have for courtesy purposes to talk to ambassadors. We got to go back to that power that the Senate does not rubber stamp at the end of it. And Ms. Hagan abdicated her role. She should be originated the foreign policy from the very beginning. But this executive has overstepped their bounds. The Senate's the one that can control that back.
Mr. Tillis, half minute.
You know, look, I think Kay Hagan supports. I think President Obama does have a foreign policy, and I think his foreign policy is actually peace through weakness. I think that he's actually believes that weakening America, making it seem more vulnerable, is somehow going to make the rest of the world behave more properly. I actually think it's creating the most dangerous environment in my lifetime. We need to have peace through strength, and we need strong foreign policy. We need to stop Kay Hagan's failed support of this president.
Next question to you, Mr. Brannon. The Internet's playing a large role. Politics, entertainment, now our economy, and we're hearing there could be policies at the federal level that will allow private companies to enter contract with private Internet service providing companies to create fast lanes, and could be at the expense of other content and people that won't pay for a fast lane. How do you balance that private enterprise against equal access for folks who surf the Internet expecting free speech?
Okay, back to the Constitution. I know it sounds crazy. We're going to take the Internet, a 21st century invention, back to an 18th century document, because core principles never change. The federal role, we'll go back to the federal government again. The federal government has no power to actually hinder, supposed to make regulations occur. If there's a market, a free market, that will actually dictate people pay for that, and the entrepreneurs taking the risk, why not? The government, there'll always be access there, because there's always going to be, if the market's allowed there to compete, you're going to have different levels at different places. The worst thing in the world would be to have the federal government get infringed and actually put barriers on that to make things fair. A fair outcome is socialism. Fair opportunity is a republic. Completely different.
Ms. Grant, fair net neutrality, where do you stand on? Is it fair access, fair opportunity?
When I think about this, I think about when we go back to, if you remember, when we first had the internet and you had dial-up or you could go through your cable internet, it's the same choice. Do you access the internet from what you've got and pay nothing or whatever you can afford, or do you go to the fast lane? There should be no government involvement in telling people how the internet can or cannot operate. It was created by an individual, not a government entity who rubber stamped it and said, here we go. So when you look at it, like Dr. Brannon said, equal opportunity is different from equal outcome. And we are the United States of America. We are not about equal outcome. We are about equal opportunity.
Mr. Harris, on the internet, should private companies be able to slow down access to things I might want to read?
I do think that we need to always understand that wherever the federal government seems to get involved, again in regulation and particularly into the private industry, you are moving right back into what we have seen is a disaster 9 out of 10 times, and the federal government picking winners and losers. That is never a good thing. And we've seen this government under this president continue to pile on with regulations and look for more opportunities for just the tentacles of the federal government to dig deeper and deeper and to go further and further into the lives of our free market and of our nation. So I would be opposed to the federal government getting involved.
Mr. Tillis is one wire into the House. Net neutrality, yeah? No?
Look, the last thing we need is the government to tell cable providers or internet access providers how fast or how slow their content should be. We're in a state now in North Carolina where you oftentimes have multiple options coming into the home. Let the market determine what bandwidths they can provide and still stay in business. I'll go back to something else about the internet that I think is very important. This president's talking about turning control of the internet over to some international body, and I think that that would be a disaster. The United States created the internet. The United States is the only trusted, I think, jurisdiction that makes sure that we truly do keep an internet that's not governed by some international body that I think is a greater threat than what you're talking about. At the end of the day, though, states need to make the decisions about where they can provide more access and how they can have people gain access to the internet. It's a critical part of our future. We've made a lot of progress in North Carolina.
Mr. Brannon.
Yeah, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it actually takes the control of our internet to organizations outside our sovereignty, back to the Senate. The Senate makes treaties with the president executing it. It's not just one way. And also, I think even at the state level, I don't want the state deciding what cable company or dish company should be. The free market is what built America. The free market will dictate. That is the key to American republicanism.
Candidates, you'll have 45 seconds to answer this final question. Time's running short. I want to ask you about surveillance. We live under a government that can theoretically and in reality track every cell phone call, or email we would choose to send as an anti-terrorism strategy. So if North Carolinians are even involuntarily giving up that alleged privacy, what are they getting in return from the federal government?
They're not getting anything in return from the federal government. The government is taking our information and storing it. And they tell you, okay, we're maybe not looking at it. You never know. But you see that they're pulling out bits of information here or there. And there is no warrant that says, Heather Grant, we're going to record everything off your phone. Heather Grant, we're going to record what you do on Google. It's a blanket warrant. And those are unconstitutional. And we need to stand up and say they're unconstitutional because they're talking about drones and being able to see you with drones.
Mr. Harris.
I do believe, Kelly, that we are living in such a rapidly changing world technologically. And I think what we have witnessed and seen that has occurred with the NSA over these recent years really should cause us to take pause and understand that what we did, as the federal government unfortunately tends to always do, is to become reactive to tragedies rather than thinking through and becoming proactive in dealing with issues. I do think the key is going to be the parameters, and we've got to make sure that while technology grows and while we are concerned for the safety of our citizens, I do think it is absolutely critical that we make sure those parameters are clear to protect the privacy of our citizens.
Mr. Tillis, surveillance.
You know, it is amazing to me that Kay Hagan could hear about the NSA scandal and not take a definitive statement saying that that was wrong and it should be investigated. It's another example of our failure of the people of North Carolina. The issue of surveillance is an important one. We need to keep our homeland safe. So we need our intelligence agencies to have access to information. But when it comes to spying on American citizens, that's where you have to draw a very straight line and say no. In fact, I appointed a committee in North Carolina to take a look at the appropriate use of drones and the inappropriate use of drones. We're going to be taking up legislation in the short session a couple of weeks from now.
Mr. Brannon.
If you give up a little bit of your liberty for liberal security, you have neither. Ben Franklin, the Fourth Amendment, this is overstepping their bounds again. For them to have what's called general warrants. The British had general warrants. They could walk into your town, walk in your house, and come do everything they want to do. That's what this right now what the NSA is doing with the drones. A general warrant is not allowed. It has to be specific. You need both. The FISA court is not constitutional. You need to have a plaintiff and a defendant there arguing the case on the exact individual. In fact, Senator Paul has a court case now to defend this, to go attacking that. So the idea of our security is crucial. We got to use the technology for that, but not to spy on Americans and overstep those bounds.
That concludes the questioning phase of this debate. We will wrap up this production tonight with closing statements, and earlier drawing determine the order of who will be giving those statements, and we begin with Mr. Brannon. 1 minute.
Well, I want to thank you for this time. This last 15 months has been phenomenal to watch our system work. I've been a servant citizen for 26 years, delivering babies, over 9,000 children. I've kept my Hippocratic oath. When I'm attacked at Hahnemann, I don't mind. I will never, ever waver on the truth. I will never waver on the sanctity of life or the Constitution. I believe it'd be arrogant of myself to run for an office and not prepare for that document, that Constitution. That's why I studied with as much vigor as I did, becoming a pelvic surgeon. This is a constitutional crisis because we have men and women deciding their policies superior to the rule of law. Also, I believe bureaucrats taking the grassroots sweat that put them in office. It's crucial to understand grassroots win elections. These issues are crucial because we've seen the government overstep their bounds. I ask you to go to gregbrannon.com. Please look at our issues. May 6th, we're asking you for your vote, and I believe we have an opportunity to take back our state. Thank you very much.
Ms. Grant.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you for having us on this evening. Like I said earlier, for me, this is not about me getting to be the next senator. What I believe is that we have to change our culture in Washington. We have to change the people we send. We need to send citizen legislators who understand that they have got to take the foundation our founders gave us and build off of that, not to create something new, but to move us back to where we started, which was a country that was based on freedoms, liberties that are guaranteed because they came from God and they were not given by man. There is no doubt in my mind that we absolutely have a leadership issue in Washington, and what we need to send are true leaders, people who understand and will stay grounded in where they came from and work for the betterment of this state and our country.
Mr. Tillis, you drew third.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm running for the U.S. Senate because Kay Hagan has failed the people of North Carolina. Kay Hagan failed the people of North Carolina when she was in the state Senate, and for the last 3 years, I've been cleaning up her mess. I've led a conservative revolution that the liberals hate, but conservatives love. I've put big government on the endangered list here in Raleigh, and I'll do the same thing when I go to Washington. We have to repeal Obamacare. We've got to heal our economy, and we've got to get our nation back on track. A senator that votes 96% of the time with President Obama is not fit to be a senator from North Carolina. Kay Hagan is nothing more than a rubber stamp for the Washington liberal establishment. We need a senator that reflects your priorities and values, a senator committed to returning this nation to its greatness. I'm that senator. On May 6th, I hope you'll vote for me, and I hope you'll join me in defeating my opponent, Kay Hagan, in November. Thank you, and God bless.
Final minute to you, Mr. Harris.
Well, Kelly, when this debate started this evening, I shared with you and with the people of North Carolina that this primary is about choosing the GOP standard bearer, the individual that will take on Kay Hagan this fall. I am absolutely convinced that unless we put up the nominee that will be able to put his life record up against Kay Hagan's record for what she has done in her vision for America, then we may very well miss an opportunity to regain this seat. I'm running for the United States Senate because I am concerned about winning this seat. And I promise you that as I've come to the table with not only leadership experience and the essentials of character and consistency and courage, I do so without questions of pay-to-play incidents, without questions of taking money from the special interest in others so that I would owe them. I come to you to be your United States Senator, the GOP standard bearer, with no strings attached. God bless you.
That concludes UNC-TV's GOP U.S. senatorial debate. Early voting is already open in North Carolina through May 3rd, but primary day is next Tuesday, May 6th. You can review this debate later this evening. Our team will be hard at work. Look for video clips at youtube.com/explore UNC-TV. It has been our pleasure to bring this debate to you tonight. Thank you so much for watching.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.